What's happening? What's up? Hold out your glass because we're about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens podcast, a place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Justin. Here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus lens to take a second look at everything. And if you are here, then you must have been intrigued by the topic, the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation. Or you just seen Dr. Judd Burton's name and you knew it was going to be good. But if you have not seen part one, I encourage you to go back and check that out because we're picking up on tablet two today. But Dr. Judd, thank you so much for sitting down and going through all this with us. I really appreciate your time. We left.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Oh yeah, man. When you offered to actually break this down into a little series, I was really excited because, like you said last episode, there's just so much here. We spent like an hour and 15 or an hour and 20 minutes just on the first tablet.
hmm hmm
But I guess where we pick up is in tablet two, uh, basically that Ea hears of the rebellion of Tiamat. So, like
hmm
where we left off was Tiamat was planning to kill her offspring, and just we got to talking about all these hybrid creatures and stuff that she was creating and preparing for battle, and then uh, brought in Kingu as her leader of her rebellion, and also took him as husband. So that's where we left off last time. But
Right.
but here we hear about Ea hears about the rebellion, and he begins to worry, and he goes to his father Anshar to tell him about the plans, and he mentions the monsters and everything that's being created that he saw. So just you know the context here of this God seeing these creatures and being so afraid, I think speaks a lot. It mentions that the monsters were being fit with the mantles of brilliance,
hmm
making them as gods. Now, what do you know about these mantles of brilliance? Because I don't know nothing.
Yeah. So we're still in terms of the creation epic. It's still very much primordial, primeval territory. We're still in the largely in the context of the beginning, as the name of the actual epic would suggest. Um, but the basically kind of without retreading old tires. In other words, basically what we're looking at here is Tiamat is getting ready to avenge Apsu, who had been the Mesopotamian personification of the underworld. That's certainly what the Apsu can. That's where we get the word abyss from. But Tiamat is enraged, dispatchment of um, the Apsu, and so now she is basically building this army, and it's comprised of all kinds of, of chimerical kinds of entities that we looked at last time, like scorpion men, and they're even kind of satyr figures. They're called rams in the epic, but they're followed up by the qualification that they incite terror and just stifling fear in their enemies, and so there may be an influence there on the later uh, iterations of Pan. Um, at any rate, the the leader of this army, as you pointed out a moment ago, is Kingu. Kingu is kind of the kind of Tiamat's general. Uh, and if you read, you certainly get intimations of this in the first tablet, but if you read in the second tablet, all these preparations are being made to equip uh, Tiamat's army, and included in them are these mantles of brilliance, and there are references to other kinds of talismans and tokens, but there's a whole, um, you know, there's a whole armory, celestial armory, if you want to call it that, that's at work to equip this rather foreboding an intimidating army that Tiamat is putting together, so much so that the other gods are trembling. And that always made me think of the Watchers in Enoch
Mm-hmm.
eventually being terrified of their own progeny. And so that's still kind of the purview here, at least in terms of connective tissue between Mesopotamian mythology and the religious ideas that eventually became um, part and parcel of Hebrew thinking in the Old Testament. So there's definitely some carryover here, but the thing that folks need to remember is that we're still very much in the primordial landscape. In other words, if we were to use an analogy from the Greek world, this is a war of the titans. It's almost like the Titanomachy uh, to an extent in Greek mythology, to where you have the first echelons of those rebellious offspring, which were about to really kind of under the auspices of Marduk, who's also referenced in these tablets, who we see becomes really the prominent uh, champion of the other gods, rather in this war against Tiamat. But in terms of other correlations that we can make here, um, Tiamat very clearly represents the unbridled, chaotic, wild elements of the supernatural. Um, in much the same way that chaos is represented in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. We spoke last time about the Tohu being a linguistic derivative of the word Tiamat. So that chaos entity is present in the Old Testament. It's present uh, almost immediately warring with God in the in the initial phases of creation.
Yeah, when his
So
spirit hovers over the waters, right? Because the waters was
that's right.
Yam, so it's like a word
They
association.
well that there's that too. Both of those elements, the water and the formlessness, those are water in the ancient world, bodies of water like the sea and lakes, things like that, even rivers to a certain extent represented chaos um, because uh, of all, particularly for the sea, not only the dangers of the weather, but all of the unknowns that existed in the deep. And of course, the imagery of the watery Absu was ever present on the minds of people, mariners from the ancient Near East. Um, and so, it was this other place that you could make use of. You could travel on it, but you couldn't live in it, couldn't breathe water. And so it represented not only chaos, but certain elements that were antithetical um, to the very livelihood of humans. So, here again, this is part of the interesting connective tissue, and it's why, sort of alluding to our last conversation, why these discoveries in um, Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq, helped to fuel a lot of the expeditions in the Levant and further studies of the Bible, because clearly we're dealing with similar traditions here. There are similar themes and indeed similar personages that are represented in both of these accounts, the Genesis account and the Enuma Elish, uh, that are so detailed that they can't be coincidence.
And one thing I thought was interesting is how you talked about the different connecting tissue. Was I found it ironic that when the first offspring came about and they planned to kill Abzu, Tiamat just stood by
Hmm.
and allowed it to happen. Whether she agreed with it or not, she
Hmm.
allowed it. And then all of a
Hmm.
sudden, she's outraged. But if I
Hmm.
remember correctly, it was because they were loud and noisy and they couldn't get any rest.
Hmm.
And then when you look at the
Right. Right. Well.
Enlil and Enki in those epics and those stories, they're
Hmm.
so similar because they create humanity. And what is it? They're being too loud and obnoxious, and the gods couldn't get any rest. So that's why they brought the flood. There's just, like you said, there's just so many, repeating themes in these stories.
Yeah, I mean, in that respect, there's kind of a poetry to it, to not just the Enuma Elish, but in fact, in Genesis too, there are poetic elements that are put to use. Um, because quite frankly, even before humans had writing, that's that's how we related history from one generation to the other, is that it was generally a kind of poem or song that was sung. And so that's why you have these kind of lyrical elements and poetic elements that exist, and repetitive themes that exist, almost a kind of rhyming of themes, if you will, that persist in the literature of that region. Um, so, getting back to, Tiamat just sort of, you know, taking a knee essentially while Apsu is dispatched with this. This points to the chaotic nature and unpredictable nature of chaos in general. Tiamat personifies that, so it shouldn't come as a huge surprise. The Apsu was useful to Tiamat at some point, and then because chaos is unpredictable, I think of always think of Two-Face from the Batman
Yeah.
comics.
Yeah.
That it was completely his behavior was completely unpredictable. Although it tended to be polar, it was still unpredictable. And in that same way, Tiamat takes a knee, as I said, and but yet when Apsu is dispatched, she is angered, in keeping with her character, because that there's that element of unpredictability. You couldn't predict how she's going to react, um, swinging from one extreme to the other. And of course, the creation of this army, going into the second tablet, speaks to all that, because look at the extent to which she is going, the unpredicted extent to which she's going to take revenge on Apsu.
Yeah, that's one thing that really stood out to me. And once he goes back, Ea, and tells Anshar about this revolt, and he talks about, she's made these horrible monsters, and she's given them the mantles of brilliance, and it even said in quotes that it made them as gods.
Mm-hmm.
It says then they
Mm-hmm.
basically called a council, like a divine council meeting of the, said the Agigi and the Anunnaki, or the
Mm-hmm.
Agigi. Uh, could you expound upon that and what the difference between those two? Because it sounds like it's like an upper lower class, like ranking of gods, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The first is a more generic designation, and the second, the Anunnaki, is probably the one that people are gonna, they're gonna hear that word and they're gonna, oh yeah, I recognize that, either from discussions in Mesopotamian or biblical literature, or in Ancient Aliens, or Sitchin's works or something like that. Um, the Anunnaki were as you pointed out, we are looking at rank and file here. So the Anunnaki are a lesser tier than their elder race, the Agigi, but they're part of the larger pantheon of Mesopotamia, and um, they include personalities like Enlil and An and Inanna, and these are some interesting names and personages to tease out of the ranks of the Anunnaki, because sometimes Enlil, because he's a king of the air, and his motivations are almost mercurial, is a kind of a Satan analog, uh, in certain settings. And Inanna, of course, finds various iterations in Mesopotamia under names like Ishtar, and in a larger swath the ancient Near East, um, shows up as Asherah, in the Astartes in the Levant.
The
So,
Queen of Heaven, right?
um, Queen of Heaven, yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at, and likely the female presence in New Testament prophecy and Revelation. We're probably looking at the same entity altogether. Um, Analogs in other cultures would have included Aphrodite amongst the Greeks and Venus amongst the Romans. We're not. This is not the Venus on the half shell that's depicted in so much Renaissance art. Um, whatever name we choose to tag on her, whether it's Aphrodite or Inanna or Ishtar, this was a goddess of war, death, and promiscuity. Um, Not the goddess of love, not the Valentine's version of mythology here. So the yeah, the Anunnaki are just one of these tiers of gods that show up in the pantheon. At least we have some rank and file in the context of the Enuma Elish. Unfortunately, um, we've never been able to recover a complete list of the Anunnaki. So we don't know. We only know a few of these personalities. I think maybe six or seven, um, or maybe a couple more. But we never find a complete list. In the fragmentary remains that we have from some of these tablets and cylinders of exactly who comprise the ranks of the Anunnaki.
Yeah, I recall like some tablets and stuff talking about the seven Apkallu sages, but like you said, I
Hmm.
mean, just those might be in a particular set of seven, and who we don't know if there was more. Or, but
Hmm.
but what I thought was interesting too was we had mentioned already that Ea was trembling with fear, and they call this divine council meeting, and
Hmm.
they're basically trying to formulate a plan. Who's going to face Tiamat and who's going to stop her? And it says that
Hmm.
silence falls over the council. That nobody
Hmm.
wants to face her, and then Ea finally speaks up, and I was like, okay, well, this guy, he's going to be brave, but no, he volunteers his son Marduk.
Right. Right.
And so we get introduced to Marduk
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Marduk is an interesting figure. Um, in our last episode, I kind of compared him as it's kind of a combination of Zeus and Hercules in Greek mythology. He embodies the not only the kingly nature, but the sort of 12 tasks of Hercules. He has, obviously he's facing this war against Tiamat, which his father so lovingly volunteered him for.
Voluntold him.
Uh, yeah, he volunteered him exactly. But that also speaks to the sort of rank and file, order of the gods here. Marduk is the champion of this council of gods, the elder gods that we're talking about here. He basically says, okay, I'll do all this, but it's going to come with a price tag. In other words, and this is sort of getting into not just tablet two, but into tablet three and some of the later tablets too. Um, But the deal that he makes basically is that, okay, I'll do this, but you're going to have to make me the king of the gods. You're going to have to give me all of that authority if I do this and I'm successful. And they sort of begrudgingly, yeah, okay, all right, whatever. You know, um, Probably thinking that his chances of actually defeating Tiamat were sort of up in the air.
He was actually
But
their
they
only
agreed with
choice
it.
too. You know what I mean? If he didn't succeed, they
It's,
were going to die.
Exactly. It spoke to their own longevity, and so Marduk emerges as the champion of the Council of Gods against Tiamat.
My name's Nick. I'm the owner of Kevlar Joe's, and I'm the roaster. I'm an Air Force Security Forces veteran, a dad to 3 wild boys, and a husband to my wife, Crystal, and a coffee enthusiast. From a family in a small town in Missouri, we started with the simple idea of crafting a perfectly bold cup of coffee. Inspired by wellness and countless pots of stale coffee while deployed, we wanted to craft a bold, clean, and smooth coffee. So we did. And we realized we wanted to share this coffee with our friends. Lord knows we could all use a good cup of coffee right about now. From the farm to your coffee cup, there's nothing like a good, well-crafted, and bold cup of coffee. No matter what time of the day, it's there to pick you up, motivate you, and relax you. We hope you enjoy our coffee. Be bold, be humble, be Kevlar. And you can find Kevlar Joe's Coffee Company anytime you want at www.kevlarjoe.com. Enjoy.
Hey guys, what's up? Tom Dunn here from Through the Black. And we have launched our new ministry outreach, No More Dead Babies. And the website is nomoredeadbabies.com. We want you to go to that website and get a free t-shirt, okay? We want you to join the movement, okay? We need soldiers to step up and say that they're going to be a voice for the voiceless, okay? Guys, we've never done anything like this before. This is a big deal, and I don't know who all is ready for it out there, but it's time to step up, okay? And we're asking you to go to the website and order the shirt. The shirt is free, but you got to pay for shipping, okay? We're going to ship it out to you as soon as we get it. You tell us what size you need, and then we're going to send you the t-shirt, okay? We're going to have other things in the future like signs. So today, I've made my own sign. So if you're coming home in the neighborhood, who wants to see this? Who wants to think about this? Nobody. But folks, we have to stand up. We have to do something. We have to let the world know that everything is not okay, and remind people that babies are being killed. Join hands with me as we step forward in faith. And we're going to be doing uncomfortable things, okay? But we've got to stand up for the baby, the new campaign. Okay. So we're asking you guys to join us. We're asking you guys to go to the website, nomoredeadbabies.com, and get a shirt. Get a free shirt, okay? Join us. The goal is to get thousands of these shirts out, okay? Now, we have a couple hundred of these shirts paid for, okay? But we're gonna keep pushing this. I think this boldness can be contagious, okay? This is not an Ohio issue. This is a United States issue. This is a world issue, okay? So guys, thank you so much, and thank you for the prayers. Thank you for getting involved.
Marduk becomes not only mythologically, but of course interwoven into that, becomes astrologically important to the people of Mesopotamia, particularly in the Amorite Babylonian period, and in the later periods like the Assyrian and the Neo-Babylonian periods. Marduk is often identified with Jupiter in Babylonian astrology, and I think that we may have touched on this last time. Marduk's star, or Jupiter, is often called Nibiru, and this is, I think that the description that I used in terms of Sitchin's interpretation of this was bull feathers.
I added
He
that
would
to
like
our
to think that
intro.
this is some road. I saw that. That he said that this was some sort of road planet that entered our solar system to 3,000-year cycle or something like that, 3,600 years. Nothing you're going to find in Babylonian literature, Mesopotamian literature, is going to lead you to believe this. And in fact, you could go right now to the Oxford, Akkadian Sumerian lexicon and look up the variations of the spelling of Nibiru, and none of them are going to point you towards some rogue planet. There may be a couple of places where it's talking about the planet Mercury, but 90% plus of them are talking about Jupiter, Marduk's star. And so he becomes ensconced because of his war against Tiamat.
And what I thought was interesting too, and you kind of touched on it, was when you compared him to Zeus, because once he makes his bargain and they agree, they all start singing his praises and stuff, and then Ashar even says he gives him a storm cloud and says that
Mm-hmm.
that he would ride into battle on this storm cloud so that Tiamat's army could not advance but retreat, and so he could have
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one battle with her. And that's kind of how the second tablet ends, is once he proclaims that he's going to do it, they sing his praises and they offer him this this storm cloud gift. But
We should probably, I'm sorry, Justin, we should probably say something about Anshar before moving on.
yeah,
As a footnote to our discussion, Anshar is a kind of interesting personage in all of this too. He's kind of well, in some places he's the father of, in other places he's the grandfather. Yeah. So he's kind of the elder statesman
was he like the firstborn of
of
Tiamat?
the gods. I think that's right. I'm trying to think of the genealogy right off the top of my head. I think that may be right. But yeah, just as a footnote, he's the he's the sagest, in other words, probably of the council at this point in time.
So when you start tablet 3, it's more preparation of the divine council. It says that
Mm-hmm.
Anshar gathers all the gods, even the first created ones. And here it is. I misspoke. The first created ones was Lamu and Lahamu. That was
Mm-hmm.
Anshar's fathers. They
Mm-hmm.
called them, it says, to declare a destiny for Marduk. And they held had a party with the elder gods, and they feasted and drank wine until they were merry, and then proclaimed the destiny of Marduk.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, another one of those little tie-ins that put me in the mind of the Greek gods with the Mount Olympus, because this kind of put me in mind of Prometheus, how he was one of
Mm-hmm.
the elder gods, but he aligned himself with the newer ones to overthrow the old.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was
Mm-hmm.
seeing like a Prometheus, like foreshadowing, I guess you could say, or archetype.
Certainly.
Uh,
Yeah, and the oracular trajectory of all of this too, with all of this language about destiny, um, is kind of interesting too. But because it turns out that destiny is kind of weaponized here. It's along with all the weapons and the accoutrement that Marduk would have had at his disposal. Destiny is kind of this. Um, it's kind of it's think of any sort of sacred weapon from any mythology. Now, like Excalibur from the King Arthur mythology, yeah, it's very much sort of in the same vein. It's not uncommon to find, um, in these hero cycles, not just in Babylonian mythology, but in mythologies all over the world, is that there's either a cache of weapons or one weapon in particular that services them and is integral to their overthrow of their antagonist. Um, I certainly don't agree with some of his own personal beliefs, but I think that Joseph Campbell really did a good job of illustrating, the elements of the hero cycle in his book, The Hero with a Thousand
Yeah, I'm
Faces,
working on that right
which is an
now.
excellent comparative mythology study that really illustrates how um, there is as Campbell puts it, a monomyth,
Mm-hmm.
a series of steps and themes involved in virtually all of the hero cycles in world mythology.
Yeah, see, I'm about 3/4 of the way through that, and I thought that was fascinating because where I like reading these myths and these epics. He kind of tied that all together for me, and like to
Hmm.
summarize it, I like how he said that basically you're in your normal day life. So like in this example, Marduk, he was just living amongst the gods and the divine council, his normal day life. But then there's a calling forth,
Hmm.
and then you
Hmm.
accept the calling forth, and then you get supernatural aid. And then once you get
Hmm.
supernatural aid, you cross. I think he referred to it as the threshold into the unknown.
Crossing of the threshold.
Yeah. So then
Hmm.
you crossing over the threshold into the unknown, and you battle the dragon or the monster.
Hmm.
And but basically, and then once you complete your task, you receive your boon. And then you take your boon and you're supposed to cross back over into the threshold. And he was saying that basically that's the hardest part, because then you have to leave the realm of the gods and the supernatural
Hmm.
back into the natural and deliver that boon to humanity and further them. And he talked about how often you're persecuted and thrown to the side, and then even in Jesus' case, crucified. But
Exactly. And see, that's what makes this really interesting to me. When I read Campbell's work initially, was this is kind of the lens that I was looking at it through. And of course, linguists and mythologists of all kinds of sorts have known about this monomyth, although they don't call it as such. It's just that Campbell does this really good job of articulating and illustrating it. But, people like Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were abundantly familiar, with the themes in these kind of cycles. That's exactly why C.S. Lewis, in looking at mythology, says that Jesus is the one true myth.
mm-hmm.
He's the one where the cycle is completed for the ultimate boon and the ultimate good of humanity. So to me, that's really exciting stuff,
Oh,
because it means that as humans, are not sort of, but we're hardwired to think this way. I've said on a number of podcasts that our native tongue is mythology. That's this sort of series of symbols and themes that humanity has communicated with, you know, for since time immemorial, since long before we had writing. And to look at the Bible that way, I don't think Christians should shy away from looking at the Bible in a mythological context, because it's all there. You know, um, God bless people like Mike Heiser, for reminding us that we need to, when we're reading the Bible, we need to think about the not just the writers but the audience. We need to think about how ancient Near Eastern peoples were thinking, and they were thinking mythologically, um, and thanks to his work and others, we're finding out that that's very much the case. That it's not just implicit in the text of the Old Testament, but it's very explicit.
no, I agree, and I'll never forget the first time I heard Mike talk about this kind of thing on his podcast, and I'll never forget it because it was kind of like a shock and awe thing to like punch you in the face,
Hmm.
and then once you wipe
Hmm.
the blood away from your nose and clear the mist out of your eyes, you can see better for it. But I remember he said,
Sure.
"Read your Bible like a fairy tale," and I was like, "What?
Hmm.
What?" you know? And then he explained it. He was like, because he said, if you read it like a fairy tale, he said, it's not. He said, but if you read it that way, he says, you're reading it with an open mind, like a childlike innocence. And you can let the story take you where it's supposed to take you because of all the, uh, the,
Mhm.
the symbolism and the little hidden nuggets that are in there. He said, because if you're reading it with all your filters put on, yeah, you get the overall theme, but there's so much more there that you're missing out on. And that really changed how I read
That's
my
exact.
Bible.
Yes, that's exactly right. He was always talking about suspending judgment when you read. I even heard him say one time, read the Bible as if it were fiction,
Yeah.
as if it were a fairy tale, knowing that it's not. But when you put yourself in that kind of mindset, you do suspend judgment. You are like a little child, and you are letting the story take you where it needs to take you. And that sort of mindset would not be lost on the original audience of the Bible, either the Old Testament or the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And so, why do we come back? Why do we do things like study comparative mythology? Why do we study things like the Enuma Elish? What bearing does that have on the Bible? Well, again, because we're looking at similar themes, and we're looking at corrupted narratives in a lot of cases. Um, we're looking at credit where it's not actually supposed to be given. So I think that we're on the cusp of a new sub branch or subfield of mythography and mythological studies. Almost a kind of biblical mythography.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, that's why I'm thankful for programs like this, because you're introducing people to literature that they may not have even thought had anything to do with the biblical world, much less inspire, so many of the archaeological expeditions in the 19th century and the early 20th century. If Laird and particularly George Smith, who did so much of the linguistic work on the Enuma Elish early on, if they had not done their work and uncovered this stuff, then there might not have been such a renaissance in biblical studies during the 19th century. So these two things are directly related to one another, and of value to Christians of all bent. Whether you're a minister or a layperson, this is valuable study.
And that's what I think is just so awesome because, you didn't know that I was reading that book. And it's just, I always call it, just God's timing. But
Sure.
it's so cool because that's the whole premise behind this whole show, was because I started with
Hmm.
the dig and then I started looking at these other things, and I just wanted to keep
Hmm.
going and go further from just the Bible because I believe it's like a spider's web. It's all connected if you follow the strand. And it's basically, I was like, I'm setting forth on my own little hero's journey here, and I want to have others
Yeah.
experience this. That's why I call it, this show is the hero's journey. And that's what it's about. It's about
Hmm.
going into the unknown, slaying the dragon, saving the damsel, and coming out on the other end, the threshold. I mean, this stuff is just
And
exciting.
the Bible has all of that.
Yes.
It has every bit of that. The entire call to faith in Jesus is a hero's call.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's why a lot of the founding fathers was so condemning of the Gnostic view. Because I read a bunch of the early
Hmm.
church fathers, they said that, yeah, they say that the resurrection was not a real resurrection; it was a spiritual resurrection, and Christ was a allegory or a Christ conscious, because that way they avoid
Hmm.
persecution because they're cowards.
Hmm.
It's just fascinating stuff. Uh, so, but basically, that was like the end of Tablet 3 because I mean there were some little tidbits in there, but basically it was just like a coronation and celebration and party for Marduk before he went in. Uh,
Right.
so if we go into tablet 4, uh, now this tablet picks up, like right after the party, and they
Mm-hmm.
start off and it says they're singing the praises of Marduk, saying that he has no equal of the gods. And basically, I seen this kind of like spell casting, because they called the two firstborn, and it said they were to pronounce the fates, and then you
Mm-hmm.
keep hearing and repeating about them singing the praises of Marduk and singing all these things. And it says that he has no equal, and that what he says will be the law. And then they pronounce that Marduk, after all this is over with, to show his power, like a demonstration. And I thought this was very interesting, that Marduk steps forward and he spoke a constellation into their midst. And then he commanded it to appear and then to disappear, and that the council cheered. And then Marduk then made a bow, a mace, and a net for the coming battle.
Mm-hmm.
So let's break that down, the whole demonstration of creating universes and making them disappear. And then, like we talked about the hero's journey, this was the gathering of the supernatural aid and the weapons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like it's to use the Star Wars analogy, you've got the benefit of the instruction of the Jedi, and then of course the weapon here, the analogous weapon would be the lightsaber. But this is like this is King Arthur pulling the sword from the stone.
Yeah. And Luke lifting the ship.
This is Luke lifting the ship. This is Beowulf's acquisition of his sword. This is there's always got to be some sort of demonstration of the worthiness of the hero, and that's really kind of from the comparative mythological lens, that's what's happening here with Marduk. Even his weapons are telling in the task that lays ahead of him, because what does he have? He's got a bow, he's got a mace, he's got a net. So the mace is a melee weapon. That's for up close contact. But he's probably going to use the bow first. The bow is the long distance weapon, right? And he can use the net to entangle whoever comes up against him, because this sort of lays out the parameters of the battle. So he's going to have to deal, with all of these, what in martial arts you would call ranges of combat. So and of course that speaks to the abilities and the varying abilities and strengths of Tiamat's minions in her army. So I think that that's very telling too, and the fact that it's this combination of things. He makes these weapons kind of in the same way that Luke has to make his own lightsaber before he actually becomes a Jedi, but he also does this magical sort of thing, right? He throws this constellation of stars out there and then wipes them away. And so there's this combination of grounded sort of celestial weapons, and then you have this demonstration of his ability, as a god, as being worthy of the task put before him. So again, these mythological themes are present in the Enuma Elish.
And it's almost like I've seen it kind of like with the whole hero of 1,000 faces perception was not only a crossing of the threshold, but basically a foot on each side, because he was showing that he was a master of spiritual, of heaven and of matter, of earth. So it was like he mastered the physical and the spiritual aspects and held both.
Yeah, he is right on the cusp, because he's still in the presence of the gods. He's still in a celestial context where he's demonstrating this. So yeah, absolutely.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for listening to the Prometheus Lens podcast. I asked if you've got anything out of this show so far and you're already subscribed, please share us with a friend. Give us a rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. That helps us to grow the show, get to new listeners, but it also helps us get better guests. Because a lot of times I send out emails to people and they check us out, and if we don't have a lot of good ratings and things like that, they won't even bother emailing me back. So anything you guys can do to help, I appreciate it. And if you're not a member of our members only group, I encourage you to do so. There's a lot of extra content on there. You get early access to episodes, private chats, members only videos and episodes. It's a great community. Join the band of brothers on this hero's journey. Well, so he's demonstrated his power. He's made his 3 weapons, and he's also received the chariot, the storm cloud from his father. So it says that he raised his mace, which he called the flood weapon, and then got on his storm chariot with its 4 horses, named Killer, Merciless, Fleet, and High Flyer. Okay, so with those, do you have any kind of insight on why he would name this mace the flood weapon, and then these 4 horses? And of course, I know a lot of people that are listening and watching are, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse might be triggered in their mind. That was the first thing that popped into my head.
Yeah, but that correlation, I suppose you could make a sort of generalized correlation, but of course we've only got one rider.
Right.
Marduk is the rider on the clouds, the rider in the chariot. The fact that his mace is called the flood weapon, may be connecting it to part of this this web of celestial influence on the weapons that he forms. Because the waters, there were these celestial waters that are part of this in the Enuma Elish. So it may be like all heroic weapons. They may be both celestial and terrestrial. So like Excalibur, for instance, was in some retellings of the Arthurian romance, was made from a falling star. It was made from a meteorite. So you've got this element of something coming down from the heavens, but it's being mailed into a weapon, a sword in this case. And so tying this to the celestial waters may be part of the imbuing process, the magical imbuing process. And not just the mace, but also the net and the bow as well.
It says when it goes on it that he dressed in a drapery of the most formidable armoring, and on his head was a blazing halo of blinding light. And he rode into battle, but then becomes dumbfounded with fear in front of Kingu and Tiamat. So like we talked about before, it's the going into the unknown and facing the monster. Right. You're all confident and ready to go once you make the decision, but then here's the true test, and everybody always is has some reservations.
Certainly, and this is true, and the other myths from traditions that we've referenced here, and
like the Epic of Gilgamesh really stood out to me when they went to go fight Humbaba.
Epic of Gilgamesh.
They both, him and Enkidu. Like first it was Enkidu scared to death, and then Gilgamesh encourages him, and they start marching again. And then next thing you know, it's Nimrod that's scared to death, and Enkidu builds him back up. So it's like they had each other to encourage each other to keep going.
Hmm. Yeah, but the ultimate test is when you're faced with the danger. You're actually faced with the task that's been appointed to you. And that's what you're looking at here. And even in the story of Jesus, um, when he's on the cross, uh, the the human aspect of him, you can tell is there's that one small moment where his humanity is in despair, calls out and says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But he goes through, he pushes through all of that, and that's what all of these heroes typically do in these cycles. Is they push. Not only do they push through it, but they're triumphant.
I'm glad you pointed that out because I even thought of in the garden. He asked them all to stay
Yes.
awake and pray because he was worried to death, and then he even
Hmm.
prayed to God and said, Father, remove this cup from me, but if it be your
Right.
will.
Exactly.
So yeah, he had a couple of moments of fear and doubt too.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, and that again, that's Jesus's humanity. The story wouldn't be as poignant, nor would it be the ultimate hero story.
That's what I was about to say. It
Uh,
solidified that hero
had they-
story.
exactly. And that again, that's why I say that these kinds of themes and stories are so basic to human culture and human nature, that they have to be hard. This God hardwired us to think like this, and unfortunately, um, particularly the more naturalistic and materialistic our societies have gotten, we've gotten away from that. For all the good that the Enlightenment did, it it helped to expunge that kind of thinking, so that we have to rediscover it. And it doesn't help that our own educational system in the West is designed to completely expunge that kind of mythological thinking.
Yeah.
Um, you can make the argument that a lot of it was preserved, in Western tradition, in that marrying of the Judeo-Christian elements with the classical elements. There was still a nugget of it that was fostered. But as of, the early 20th century, the decline in our own system of education has been to basically culturally commodify mythology. In other words, that it has value as distinctiveness of culture, but beyond that, an intersection with the supernatural, speaking to our fundamental humanity, probably not so much. And that's a grave misfortune, and by design, I might argue. I might argue.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I believe that the demonic has tried to expunge completely from Western education in particular.
Yeah, and they also just want to make it all psychological.
Always.
That's where I think Campbell
That's
fell
why I
short.
always. Yeah, yeah. Um, whether I've taught humanities or ancient history or mythology or religious studies, I've always had students read excerpts. At least familiarize themselves with excerpts so that you're not reading stuff. You're not just reading what some scholar thinks about the material, that you're actually, intersecting with it. Um, and the same is true of, whatever biblical studies that I've done. Intersection with the pristine, uncommentated, uh, literature, whether it's the Old Testament or the Enuma Elish that we're looking at here. Part of the process of understanding these themes, and not just the universality of them, but the corruption of those themes in so many of these world traditions.
Yeah. So now we've made it to the juicy part for all the action fans that are with us. We've made it to the battle. and he had that moment of doubt and fear. But it says that the gods then gathered around to watch and to cheer him on and encourage him. But it says that Tiamat began her spells. And I thought this was interesting. In her mouth was lies, deception, and cunning. So these
Mm-hmm.
are, descriptors, of the Hasatan. He's the
Mm-hmm.
great deceiver. It said he was a liar from the beginning. And he's even described
Mm-hmm.
in the garden as, the craftiest. There was no one more crafty than he was. So I thought that was very interesting. Like she was speaking doubt into him. I mean, we don't get the context here, but it's almost like she was, you puny little god, you think you can take me? I'm going to scatter your bones up in the dust, and, kind of making him have some self conscious thoughts and doubts, like some psychological, cursing there.
Mm-hmm.
But it says that Marduk calls her out for her rebellion and her wickedness, for wanting to kill her own children. And butting her in a rage, she charges forward. So he triggers her rage, and like you said, she's chaos, she's unpredictable. So it's like he almost plays on this to his advantage, and he gets her enraged,
Mm-hmm.
and she just ruthlessly and mindlessly charges forward. And it says that as soon as he does, he uses the storm cloud, and that he unleashes the winds, and that she even opens her mouth to try to swallow this wind, but it is so strong that it locks her mouth open, and that he then
Mm-hmm.
casts the net over her. And it says that the winds rushed through her in her open mouth, and blew into her belly and like inflated her. I thought that was pretty wild. But the battle goes on, and it doesn't even mention that he even uses this bow. And it says that he defeats the dragon, and he cuts out her heart. And the gods who sided with her stood shaking in fear that Marduk spared those who turned themselves over. And he destroyed their weaponry and cast his nets over them, trapping them. But then it says he took the tablets of fate from Kingu, who did not deserve them, and placed his own seal upon them, and then clasped them to his chest, and then announced the captured gods were now his slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so here we've got the confrontation. We've got the actual you know, almost a, although there are all these other entities too, it's almost a duel of
mm,
champions in a lot
Dave
of
and
ways, which
Goliath.
again is another myth. Yeah. So um you have all the things that you would expect from, the hero versus a dragon tale, which is basically what we've
Mm,
got here. Um the net being symbolic of entrapment, but also not just entrapment, but also it speaks to the authority that Marduk has over the gods that were in that had sided with Tiamat. So, in a lot of ways, the wording here is slavery. They're slaves, but they're kind of vassals. In other words, they've retained their powers, but now out of force, they have to be subject to Marduk. So not only does he subject and defeat chaos, he defeats Tiamat, but everyone that threw in their lot, you know, monsters that had survived, um, which interestingly, I should have mentioned that in our discussion about Tablet 2 and 3. Uh, these are all gigantic creatures. They're described as being immense, and so there's more connective tissue to traditions like the Nephilim and the other tribes of giants, and the chimerical Nephilim in the pre-flood world as well. But yeah, this is the climax in a lot of ways in the story, because it's been leading up to this, and now the resolution of all the other stages of the hero's journey we can read in the foregoing tablets, which looks like we've got another episode staring us in the face, which is fine to me because I love talking about this stuff.
That's awesome, yeah. And you also have what I thought was interesting was after he does this, he basically embodies all the other type mythos, and like more specifically the Norse. You know, in the Norse mythology, uh, this chaos was embodied by this primordial giant called Ymir, and that once he kills Ymir, he cuts him up into pieces and uses the pieces of his corpse to create the earth. And it, you know, it was saying that they used his, I can't remember exactly, I think it was like his eyebrows as like the rim around Midgard, and to keep the frost giants out of Midgard to protect humanity, and that his skull was the firmament, and his body was the land mass. And it's just, you know, it was, you know, and you see this here because it says that after, you know, when he kills her, the only description you get about a body part is the heart. It just says that he removes her heart. But after he pronounces, you know, victory, and that the other creations were now subjugated to him, it says that he then crushes Tiamat's skull and cuts her into pieces. And it says he takes her middle and he thrusts it up to make the vault of heaven. And then he drew a gate and put there a guardian, proclaiming, her waters were bounded. And it said he then traversed the sky, seeking a holy place, calling that place Abzu. So, I mean, I'm sure you've got all kinds of connections here, but it's like, you know, I seen, you know, that with the Midgard, and the waters above and the waters below with the firmament. You have that in Genesis creation, and there's just all kinds of little nuggets there.
Yeah, and there's also in the Norse stuff, there's also the slaying of the Midgard serpent, which is somewhat reminiscent of this. You know, it's a classic hero versus the dragon tale. So yeah, there's creating something out of nothing is also at play here too, because or at least the unpredictable in the case of Tiamat. Creating something out of chaos is what's actually unfolding here. And that's, you know, in a way, there's some connective tissue to, you know, to the first chapter of Genesis, because you've got the Tohu and the Bohu, you know, there in the beginning, the form and the formlessness and the void, God's spirit hovering over the waters of the deep. And so there is that element there that God's creating something out of chaos, you know, in the Genesis account. So there's definitely some, I would argue that there's connective tissue there.
Even the Psalms, it talks about, it says that, you know, you busted Rahab into pieces. And that's what it says here.
That's right. Rahab. Yes. Being in that serpent imagery is serpent/dragon imagery is preserved in even landforms in places, even in Israel. This is something that Doug Van Dorn and I are looking at in our forthcoming book on the Serpent Mound. But for instance, a lot of people will be familiar with my work on Peneus, Caesarea Philippi. Well, in Old Testament times, this region wasn't a city, but it was a kind of a shrine site, and it was known as Beth Rahab. Now you can sort of play fast and loose with the vowels in West Asian Semitic languages, as we talked about at the beginning of the survival of words and whatnot. It's the consonants, that end up surviving. And that Beth Rahab is the house of serpent, basically, because that designation is used in a number of places, including Job, for this kind of serpentine Leviathan imagery. And in fact, there's a just to the northwest of Peneus, there is a valley that looks like a writhing snake, that opens up from the Hermon and the Anti-Lebanon mountains, into the Golan, and it is actually called the Valley of Rahab. So, like I say, there are those place names, and again, this far northern region, north was the direction of where evil came from in Hebrew cosmology. So even in some of the landforms, these ideas are present, in ancient Israel.
Yeah, I mean it's all through there, and not just Israel. I mean the world. You have the Serpent Mound in Ohio. Down in South America, you have the plumed feathered
Oh
serpent
yeah,
Quetzalcoatl.
there's
Yeah,
Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan amongst the Maya. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's just amazing. And one more thing before we let you go for this episode. We kind of touched on it, but we can't end this discussion of this tablet if we don't at least revisit the tablets of fate. Now I know we
Hmm.
touched on it a little bit, but I just want to throw out some little theories and correlations and see what you think about them. But this is treated like a birthright to me because it's like,
Hmm.
she was the mother or the one because the father was now dead. So it's up to the mother to
Hmm.
bestow, the blessings or birthright. Well, she gives
Hmm.
these tablets of fate to Kingu.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
what's the very first thing that Marduk does when he defeats Tiamat? It says that he rips these tablets of fate from him, puts his seal
Hmm.
on it, and then clasps it to his chest. But it specifically says that when he took them from him, it said because he was undeserving. And I could
Hmm.
not help but think of, Ezekiel 28, every precious stone was your covering, and the whole, garments of the garden of God theory. Uh, so it's
Hmm.
like, is this, you know, a physical item? Is this, allegory for birthright or kingship, or maybe
Hmm.
if and or both? Or what's your opinions on these
I,
tablets?
I think that's very much what you're looking at here. I mean, and it all kind of goes back to what Cook was offering, in exchange, when the gods say, okay, when he gets how did you put it? How did you put it?
Voluntold.
He was voluntold, voluntold. He says, okay, but if I do this and I'm successful, then you're going to have to give me X, Y, and Z. And of course, that was the supreme authority as a god. And he does it. And this is like a token of that. It's a trophy, it's a symbol, it's a token of him doing that. And what's interesting about it is that it stands apart from their consent. When they agree to all of this, if they ever need a reminder, it's like, don't forget what I did, don't forget who I slew, don't forget what I took from that entity. And those are these tablets of fate, in much the same way that the garments of Adam and Eve ostensibly were the markers of not only um
Dominion and high priesthood.
yeah, yeah, exactly, but not only before the flood but ostensibly after the flood, because they were preserved by Noah to be handed down the patriarchal line until they're stolen somewhere between Arphaxad and Nimrod. And because they seem to be, they veer off of the patriarchal line there. And again, if we're to believe some of the apocryphal accounts, it's Esau that dispatches of Nimrod, which puts an interesting hue on the next episode between Esau and his brother Jacob, because he sells his quote unquote birthright. He comes into camp, he's clearly flustered, probably because he's had a horde of giants chasing him along with Nimrod. He rests that token on what, again, if that's the case, and Nimrod had those garments, he rests that token back and literally exchanges the birthright for a bowl of stew, essentially. And with Esau, in this shaken state of mind, it's not hard to see how he would be, ready to part with those. I made a video about this without getting too far off topic. I made a video about this a couple of years ago, where I hypothesized that is there a chance that these garments were woven into the coat of many colors?
That's what I believe.
And I think there's at least a good case, if not a strong case, to make that, because of how important that token was in illustrating the authority of the patriarchs of God's chosen people.
Yeah, if you look at the context too, it's like the extra biblical text says that, when Nimrod was 20 years old, he put on those garments, and it says that he was made strong, yea, a mighty man of the field, and through the garments was able to prevail over all the nations. So, I mean, it points directly to those garments giving him some kind of supernatural ability and strength. And it's like, I've theorized, where it says that in Genesis where Nimrod became Gibor, maybe that's why. And then when you look at this coat of many colors, right after this coat of many colors is given to Joseph, that's when he has this supernatural dream where even the stars bow down to him. And he tells his brothers, and that's when they, conspire to kill him or get rid of him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, gosh, we could probably do an entire series on just that too.
Which honestly, I've done some episodes with some other podcasts, and I've called it the Epic of Esau. And I've talked about these garments and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm actually in the middle of writing a book about all this stuff right now.
Fantastic. Yeah.
My first swing at a book. So I might have you give me some feedback on it.
That's absolutely. That's a fascinating topic. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, once again, man, thank you so much, and let everybody know where they can find your stuff and about all you got going on.
In general, you can find stuff, whether it's books or coffee now, even. You can find all that at burntbeyond.net. If you're interested in learning more about what we're talking about tonight, I teach an entire program of classes on the ancient Near East, and you can take courses through the Institute of Biblical Anthropology. All you have to do is go to burntbeyond.net/IBA, and you can follow the links, and it'll get you to where you need to go.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Judd, thank you so much for all your time. And it looks like we're going to get a part 3, and I'm stoked about that.
Part 3.
Third time's the charm.
So looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it, and stick around for part 3. Until next time, torches high.